Welcome to Thinking Like a Lawyer with your hosts Ellie Mistal and Joe Patrice, talking about legal news and pop culture, all while thinking like a lawyer. Here on Legal Talk Network.
Hello, welcome to another edition of Thinking Like a Lawyer. I'm Joe Patrice from Above the Law. We have a show for you today. I am not making any representations that it's good. I just said there is a show for you today. Anyway, as I said, I'm from Above the Law. I am joined by another Above the Law person that you know so well, Kathleen Rubino.
Come on now.
I wasn't making representations. Today is all about cabining what I say.
Yeah. Here's the facts.
Very, very, very careful with
just
all
the facts,
words.
ma'am.
I mean, that's what being a lawyer is, being very cautious about.
I thought you're supposed to make arguments. Aren't you an advocate for your client?
You've got to be very circumspect in what you say. It's about parsing your words, being careful. So we are here and we have all sorts of fun things to talk about.
I don't know about fun, but certainly interesting. Let's say that.
Fair enough.
You were very concerned a second ago of being accurate and circumspect in your language choices.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair.
Here we go.
So we are recording we're still in the midst of the Republican National Convention, which this is not technically a politics podcast, especially now that we don't have Ellie anymore. But there were a lot of legal issues that came up in the midst of this.
Well, they also got quite a few lawyers up there talking.
There are a few lawyers, but we have some legal issues that came up, so we thought we would talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so what did you want to address first as you untangle that convention? Oh, and we have another bit after this. We're going to talk a little bit about sexual harassment and why you shouldn't do it, especially at Yale. But we'll get to that in a minute. But first, so RNC, so what did you want to tackle first?
I mean, there was a lot of issues there. The St. Louis couple lawyers that...
Okay, do you want to start there?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, because it was a question.
Sure.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
So first up, on the first night, we got a appearance of the McCloskeys. That is the couple that you may remember as the folks who took out an AR-15 and a pistol and started waving them at people marching by their house in St. Louis. At the time, when they did that, they were very cognizant of how that looked and felt that it was... they wanted people to understand they really didn't have anything against the movement. They were reacting because they felt they were in trouble.
Right.
They have
done
apparently backtracked from that and leaned into the idea that...
they're getting their own sort of fame and notoriety from leaning into sort of the kind of underbelly of what that all represents.
Yeah. So they went on and gave... I would say it was a very interesting speech. I thought it was super entertaining, mostly because it looked like a hostage video. It was almost as if somebody had an AR-15 aimed at them the whole time. They delivered their lines in the most stilted, awkward manner possible.
Not quite ready for prime time is what I'm hearing here.
It wasn't, and it was weird considering that these are attorneys and attorneys who are trial attorney folks, that they would have such a stilted and awkward way of speaking. We expect
not every lawyer is a good lawyer, right?
Right, but sure. And obviously there's 1,000,001 tax attorneys, I'm going to pick on you for a second, who could not carry a conversation, but are just, they're like brains that we hide in a room, and then they occasionally pop out and say, I discovered a new way to port millions of dollars. But trial lawyers, that is their game. Being able to talk to people is what they're supposed to do.
Sure, but I do think that there is a vast difference between having being a trial lawyer and being able to have a conversation as it is with a jury or a judge in a room, as opposed to over, Zoom or whatever technology was being used, right? I do think that there is a difference between being comfortable via technology and in person. And I think I think everyone recognizes that as very true right now, as we're only over Zoom.
Yeah, I guess. Well, it's not Zoom. This was just film.
Well, any kind of
video.
recording. People are. Listen, there's a reason why back in the golden age of Hollywood, there were folks who did great on the stage but didn't make the transition to Hollywood. Right? Not everyone translates well over camera.
But this this chode has done interviews, right? Like, we've seen him on TV talking to people already. We know that he's not this awkward. So I don't know. I feel it felt weird. It felt like a hostage video, and it felt as though they weren't free to say what they necessarily wanted. That not that what they were going to say was going to be much different necessarily, but it seemed very scripted, and that they weren't ready for a script. Was my takeaway. And the script...
I don't know. I feel like that gives them a lot more benefit of the doubt.
Again, I've seen them on TV before giving interviews.
I'm sorry. I don't mean that. Yeah. I mean that you seem to be saying also that there's some content differential that they would be doing or changing if it was solely up to them. As far as I can tell, listen, if they're willing to get up there, no one's forcing them to be on the RNC. When they make that decision and they have gone on and they've approved the script.
Yeah, but... Did you watch this thing? They went on a drag for a considerable amount of time of the short speech about like obscure housing regulations. Like it was clear that this was stuff that wasn't top of mind to a regular person. That was put in front of them. Like, you have to go on this jag about Fair Housing Act of '68 amendment that was added to the CFR in 2016. Like, what was that?
First of all, lawyers are the only ones who are going to be able to do that anyway. But
right, but it was just so awkward.
I don't think you should give them the benefit of the doubt. Like, oh, they're somehow better than the speech that they gave. They gave the speech. They made that decision. It's on them.
Sure, that wasn't in any way.
That is the way you're coming across.
That isn't in any way what we're talking about. What we're talking about is the fact that there are people who are trial attorneys who are incapable of giving a speech. And it seems as though it's because something was thrown in front of them and they don't understand how to deal with a script. And it was because they were being used as a messaging board for some weird, obscure policy decisions that probably, I mean, look, if you put them out there to just talk about how important their guns were, I think they would have been fine. But that wasn't the decision. The decision was to have them talk about some other stuff that they seemed woefully unprepared for. Anyway, so that was night one. After that, we got some more people. So what happened next?
Tiffany Trump got up there. She's a recent Georgetown Law Center graduate. And I saw one publication referred to her as a dollar store Ivanka Trump.
Oh.
Which, it's a good line. It's a good line. You got to appreciate the cleverness there. But she attempted to come across or to, impart more of the humanity that I think that is missing from large swaths of her family and relate to folks by saying, hey, I'm a recent law school graduate and I need to, I'm looking for a job too. Which is stunning. First of all, I don't know how a T14 graduate who seemingly did just fine in class is somehow struggling to find a job. But put that to one side. It rings especially hollow when someone who's lived such a life of privilege comes up and says, I understand what it's like to not have a job. It's vastly different. She may not have a job in the sense that, and there might be some sort of existential dread. Oh, what am I doing with the rest of my life? What do I want? How am I going to be meaningful? Whereas other folks who are graduating with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt and loans as a result of going to law school are thinking about, and if they don't have jobs, they're thinking about lots of different things than just, their contributions to the world. They're thinking about, how do I feed my family? How do I make sure that we don't become unhoused during a pandemic? There's a lot more, and those are the things that really are worrying people right now, or keeping folks up. Not like, oh, what am I going to do with my life? Which at best is the sort of worry that I think that a Trump has right now.
Yeah, there's a real, it's pernicious, this problem. And when you go to law school, you run across it. There are just people who don't quite grasp that their experience of the same problem you're having is a very different experience.
Yes.
When I don't have a job, I don't know what I'm doing.
Right.
When they don't have a job, they go to the Hamptons for a week. Like it's
or
really
a year, right? They have that luxury. It's more than just, a short period of time. And I don't think that that they grasp that. And also something that we've talked a lot about on Above the Law generally is that just having a law degree does not insulate you from those sorts of fears and economic uncertainty and insecurity issues, right? And a lot of times people go to law school assuming that, oh, it's a great profession, you can make a lot of money, and those opportunities may or may not be there for you when you graduate law school, particularly, during a pandemic. We don't know what those who are starting law school now, we don't know what the market's going to look like in 3 years. But the reality is, people think that, oh, I have a law degree, I'm going to be okay. But you don't know that. And that's the truth. And you've put a big mortgage on your future when you've taken out $200,000 worth of loans in order to get said degree, and assuming that you're going to be able to pay it back in some reasonable amount of time. But that's not always true.
Yeah, and I feel as though she did not take out many loans.
That's my guess.
But it is true that I don't think people quite grasp, and I assume the intention was that the audience for this speech wouldn't grasp that within the T14, the job cycle is such that you do know where you're going to work by the time you graduate. That's all usually been settled during your second year. So it's weird to assume she didn't have that lined up. It's probably because I don't know. You almost have to not have tried.
Right. I think that's true. If you're graduating, with decent grades and from a T14 law school, your chances of not knowing what you're doing after graduation is pretty small. And if you don't know, it's either because you have a wealth of options available to you and you can make a decision on a dime, because you have the sort of family connections that will give you plenty of options in the future, right? Or something's gone very, very awry, which is always possible. I don't want to say that, bad things happen to people.
Oh, absolutely.
That's certainly a possibility, but it seems far more likely in this case that if she doesn't have a job, it was not, the way she phrased it was a little awkward. It's not 100% clear whether or not she has a job lined up, but if she doesn't, it's because she has all the options, right? She will always be the daughter of a president, no matter what happens, and that will inevitably open up doors, even besides the money that she comes from.
Right. So, real quick, I guess the last topic that I can think of coming out of that. Oh, actually, no. Before we get on that, there's another thing I wanted to say about Tiffany. So, right. So she suggested that she had this problem, but I think you've made a great point that there are, normal people in these sorts of situations have different. It's just a different relationship to that and a different reason to worry. Another reason to worry is if you have a contract deadline. Contract Tools by Paper Software is the most powerful, versatile, and fully featured Microsoft add-in for contracts. For less than $1 a day, Contract Tools can help you navigate complex legalese, fix common contract drafting problems, and much more. See for yourself with a 7-day free trial. Go to papersoftware.com/trial and get started today. So, the last issue that came out of that was the Hatch Act, which
I was going to say, if you had a Google alert set for Hatch Act, you've been getting
been
all
blowing
the emails.
Up.
Yeah.
So the Hatch Act, which is the law that says that various federal government officials are not allowed to engage in the political process. This typically covers people like, say, the Secretary of State or the Secretary of Homeland Security, but this person isn't that. He's claims to be the acting Secretary of Homeland Security, but it appears as though legally he's not even that, according to a recent report. So it's not really clear. But whatever that guy's job is, he's part of this too. They're not supposedly allowed to do this. Both of them have spoken at the convention, which would appear to be a violation. However, the entity whose job it is to enforce violations has 0 members on it right now because they have been purged and not replaced by the administration. So
seems problematic.
The Hatch Act appears to be completely toothless, is our takeaway for this week.
Yay.
Yeah.
No, it's true. And I mean, the Trump administration has, and not only that, but a lot of right-wing critics have also been spreading rumors and mistruth lies about various instances of other presidents using folks that would be violations of the Hatch Act as well. But all the ones that I've seen have proven to be inaccurate and just.
I mean, it definitely comes up, and it
sure.
It comes up and it came up during the Obama administration, So a good example that I remember just kind of off the top of my head was Kathleen Sibelius, when she was at Health and Human Services, did an interview talking about normal work.
Sure.
And at
Part
some
of her job,
point, somebody asked a question about the upcoming, at this point, 2012 election. And she responded with something about reelecting the president, which that technically is a violation of the Hatch Act. And her response was to write a check and pay for the travel that was involved in the entire trip to compensate the federal government for the fact that she technically was politicking on the federal government's dime.
Right.
Now, it was a
But that's very different than
it was a minute out of
nor was the Obama
process.
administration trotting out Kathleen Sibelius in order to politic for her on the government's dime, which is what I think a lot of these
very
memes,
much a different
right-wing memes are saying and doing.
Yeah, and this is the problem with the whole both sidism, which I hate that phraseology because I think that it's often misapplied by people.
For sure.
But this is kind of the problem with it, which is both sides did this, but the distinctions between what they did are fairly substantive.
Yes.
I guess there was also,
and also there was teeth in the Hatch Act back then because there were people on the committee.
Well, the question now is, do we even need a Hatch Act anymore? Like, if we're gonna,
I think we need a better Hatch Act.
There are two questions. One, that it needs to get far toothier and do that,
More toothsome. Yeah, no.
Or is it just one of those situations where we all know that people who are political appointees to jobs like the Secretary of State position do have a stance on who wins the upcoming election, and it's okay for them to say, we believe as a matter of the foreign policy that we're executing that our boss is right.
I could not believe more strongly that we can't allow this to be the beginning of the end. We need to see it and respond and make it stronger and make it less and make less of it, right? I think that it's really problematic. I think that, being able to draw distinctions between, the business of running a country and trying to get the job again, it needs to be clear, it needs to be distinct. And of all the things that are going to change, the ways politics will change because of the Trump administration, I think it behooves the next administration to make sure that this does not become commonplace. To create rules also that prevent it from becoming commonplace, because just because the next administration may not engage in it does not mean it needs to be very clear. There needs to be a more toothier response or consequences available.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. I'm kind of coming around to the idea that obviously there needs...
It seems very nihilistic, though, right?
No, look, there needs to be something. There needs to be something to prevent the government from saying, we're going to take all of our people off of working on nuclear arms reduction deals and have them hand out leaflets, like on the federal government dime. That's obviously problematic. But I do think there's a distinction between that and the Secretary of State expressing that, yes, I'm obviously a political appointee. I obviously was a prominent Republican legislator for years. I do think that from what I've been working on, like that the president's fine. I don't think that's necessarily bad. And I think part of the problem with the Hatch Act is that we have been requiring people in that sort of position to adhere to it in a way that was somewhat chimerical that it would ever work. I think that the idea of making a distinction between the career work of the bureaucracy and politicking is important, but that there are certain figures who are political appointees in high-profile jobs who we should not hold to the standard of not being able to express, obviously, I'm part of this administration and support it, It might be a situation where its breadth now is the problem.
There is like a way to deal with it, right? That's what Kathleen Sibelius did, right? She said, okay, the government shouldn't be paying for this. It's not a reason to say like we should get rid of all of our regulations, that we should go backwards.
No, not all. I'm saying that there's a distinction and that there is a carve out now for the president and the vice president, because obviously they have to run for office.
It's their jobs on the line.
I just think that we could probably solve a lot of the violations that exist.
By not making them violations, sure.
No.
That's true of everything.
Well, fair enough. But we could solve a lot of the violations that have been happening, dating back and including people like Sibelius, Sibelius' situation, if we just said that the political appointees who are the heads of these departments are not going to be held to the standard of not being allowed to express political opinions.
There has to be a standard, though, there, right? It can't just be like they can do whatever they want. Because
I'm not sure. Like, does it really bother anyone to know that the Secretary of State supports the administration?
No, not that it's that's not what it's bothersome about the violations of the Hatch Act, right? It's that they're spending their time and resources of the federal government doing these electioneering activities.
And I think
it's bad enough, like I understand the carve out for the president and the vice president, but it's bad enough that the American people are, quote, paying for them to politic.
Right.
That's sort of inevitable, and you deal with it, whatever, but the onus should not be on the American people to pay for more members of the federal government to electioneer.
Yeah, I don't know. There are definitely acts that go too far and stuff like that. I think the idea of hijacking a naturalization ceremony as a prop is bad. That said, that's bad. The idea of a cabinet official speaking just doesn't bother me, and it didn't bother me when it happened before, and it doesn't necessarily bother me now. But alas,
I think who's paying for these events also is a big consideration, and it needs to be for any future legislation.
Sure. And look, if somebody was flying somewhere for the sole purpose of electioneering, then that's problematic. If you're in Jerusalem for other reasons and you hop in,
I think that defining sole purpose is really problematic. I think that if you're doing electioneering there, I think that has to count as electioneering, right? Because it's like, oh, I could take my trip to wherever, any time, but I'm going to do it in order to coincide with the RNC. And I
just feel like this is like law firm expenses.
They're leveraging.
Yeah,
they're leveraging their office.
Sure.
In a way that's problematic.
I mean, I think that's that fine distinction between like using a naturalization ceremony as a prop is certainly leveraging that power, but somebody whose job required them to be in a city for other reasons is doing their job in the city for other reasons, then appearing on a Zoom call to say, I stand with my boss. I mean, listen, doesn't strike me as
this is a Zoom call, right? You can have any background you want, right? They don't have to be utilizing the trappings of their position in order to election.
Yeah, fair enough. President. I mean, maybe that's the distinction that has to happen. I don't know. I definitely think that the reason this
live from Jerusalem does not need to happen.
I just think this gets violated so often because it is so broad. And it's treated as a non-issue by so many because it's so broad, and that if we want to fix it, we need to nail it.
Levels level 1, level 2.
Sure, maybe it's that. Maybe it's specific act carve-outs rather than whole positions. Whatever it is, I don't pretend to have an answer. I just feel like we're too eager to say, oh, just off with their heads with all of this. I think that that's the mentality that got us to this problem. Well, anyway, hey, do you want to talk about Yale Law School?
Sure. Okay. So 2 years ago in 2018, news broke that there was an investigation into inappropriate behavior going on that involved a very prominent law professor, Jed Rubenfeld. He's a very well-known law professor and also married to Amy Chua, who's known for writing Tiger Mom, and she's also a Yale Law School professor, and she's also on the Yale clerkship committee. And the investigation went into a series of inappropriate behaviors against Professor Rubenfeld. And finally, 2 years later, they came back with a finding, as reported by New York Magazine, that there was sexual harassment and inappropriate behavior, and he would be suspended for 2 years from the law school. Also banned, I think, from having small meetings and groups, because a lot of the allegations came from dinner parties that he was supposedly having with law students and stuff like that. So he won't be able to have small meetings with students again.
Seems like Amy needs to be more of a tiger wife.
Oh. okay. But, okay. And I think that what some folks have pointed out, and I think is a very fair point to make, is that, the other way to phrase this is not just law professor gets 2-year suspension for sexual harassment, is law professor allowed to keep his job despite sexual harassment. And that is a very, I think, fair and interesting way of turning the lens and saying, what are we focusing on? And it's true. I mean, I should also note that Rubenfeld denies the allegations and says that he did not sexually harass anybody during the course of his tenure at Yale Law School. But it should be said that, the law school has made this finding about behavior that he allegedly engaged in, and 2 years is the only. That's it. He still gets to come back. He still gets to be noted Yale Law School professor. So, and in some of his statements, he said that he was unable to know who his accusers were. However, Yale policy is pretty explicit and says that the accusers have to be known to everyone. And additionally, one of the claimants came and spoke to New York Magazine and said that they were very clear that their name was absolutely known to Rubenfeld during the course of the investigation.
I mean, this is certainly something that has been heard of before. The conversations about this were certainly circulating during the Kavanaugh hearings because Rubenfeld and Chua were both very active and aggressive supporters of Kavanaugh's nomination. Their daughter actually clerked for Kavanaugh.
Yep.
So they were pushing that as that was happening. Obviously, most of the country's attention was on the Kavanaugh part, but there were conversations and articles popped up then about these allegations circulating, and that's what ultimately prompted Yale to begin an internal investigation, which is how we got to where we are today.
Yep. Very true. But I think it's a very fair point to turn the lens as to what the ultimate impact has been, despite the finding of inappropriate behavior.
Yeah, I mean it's weird. Like, you do have tenure, which is designed to protect academics, which it makes it very difficult to get rid of somebody.
Sure,
entirely.
It's also designed, it's supposed to, in its ideal form, right, it's supposed to protect academics so that they have academic freedom, not so that they then can,
right,
not so that they can harass folks.
Right. Although, I mean, as a general matter, I think it's a labor protection to protect them from the school.
Listen, I'm pro labor.
Yeah, so it's hard, and that's why I think that there is no termination, but it's a suspension. There's obviously some degree of hope that a punishment can lead to some changing of behaviors that would avoid these sorts of problems. But we'll see. The
story's not finished being written.
Yeah, especially considering that seems as though he's going to be fighting. So there we go. Right. Well, cool. I think we've covered everything, haven't we?
Yeah.
This was an eventful week.
Pretty packed week.
Yeah. So it's been and we didn't even discuss the exciting stuff coming out of the International Legal Technology Association show.
Dun, dun, dun.
Which, okay, that's a different kind of sound effect. Yeah, no. I've been doing that. You can check some of my coverage of that on the website, which is where you should be all the time, checking out Above the Law, because we're writing there pretty much constantly. This 30 minutes is our only real break. Please send help. With all that said, thanks for listening. You should be subscribed to the show. You should give it reviews, write something about it. It always helps us get more attention for what we're doing here. You should follow us. She's at Catherine 1, the numeral 1. I'm at Joseph Patrice at Twitter. Listen to this show you already have successfully done. Good job, you. You can also check out our ATL COVID cast, our special report series on COVID and the changing of the legal profession, and The Jabot, which is a show Catherine hosts about women and minorities and diversity issues in law firms. Oh, and all the other offerings of the Legal Talk Network. And thank you, as always, to Contract Tools by Paper Software, who is sponsoring the show. And with that, now I think we're done.
If you'd like more information about what you've heard today, please visit LegalTalkNetwork.com. You can also find us at AboveTheLaw.com, ATLRedline.com, iTunes, RSS, Twitter, and Facebook. The views expressed by the participants of this program are their own and do not represent the views of, nor are they endorsed by, Legal Talk Network, its officers, directors, employees, agents, representatives, shareholders, and subsidiaries. None of the content should be considered legal advice. As always, consult a lawyer.